on this platform, all of us are pro-Trump to an extent. We like a lot of the things that he pushes, especially when they align with our conservative values.
I'm going to be a little hard on him for this one. He absolutely caused the liberals to win. It speaks for itself. The progressive candidate, he didn't run against the conservative candidate. He ran against Trump.
I think Trump did it on purpose.
I am just empathetic towards the suffering of the middle who, instead of getting serious change, they got a lot of the same.
This week, Mark Carney was elected as Canada's new prime minister, and he largely ran on an anti-Trump platform. So here's some of the things that he stated recently. He's publicly stated Trump is trying to break us as Canadians. So obviously I'm not Canadian. We all are United States citizens, so we're looking from the outside, right? But then he's also stated Canada will never yield to Trump's threats. He also said Canada's old relationship with the US is over. One of the things we saw, the main conservative opponent, not only did he lose, by a small majority, but he also lost his seat in parliament that he had held for 20 years prior to this. Mm-hmm. Now, the Liberal Party almost took over the parliament, so they almost got the majority seats, but they barely missed out on that. So that's kind of a win for conservatives a little bit, but sort of a silver lining, you could say. But here's the question. Could all of this, and this is what people are talking about right now, could all this be the result of Trump's loose talk when it comes to other nations like Canada? So on this platform, all of us are pro-Trump to an extent. We like a lot of the things that he pushes, especially when they align with our conservative values. I don't personally like everything that Trump has done or said, and I don't agree with everything that he supports, but I do support him in a lot of ways. We made a film about Donald Trump called The Outlier, about his 2016 campaign, and it even applies to this last run. So that's on this channel if y'all want to go watch that. So you can see that we're very pro-Trump in some ways, but the question today is, did Trump's mouth get him in trouble in this case? So are we seeing a negative impact? One of the things he said recently was Canada should become part of the US. Even on the day of the election, he stated publicly, I believe it was either on Truth Social or on X, Canada, come on, you know who you want to be in charge of you? Me, essentially, is what he was saying. There's this idea of all of this, has created fuel for the fire that Mark Carney actually won the election on. Very anti-Trump, even in his acceptance speech and all that kind of stuff, or his victory speech, all of that, it still was very anti-Trump. And we're gonna hold the line against all the things that Trump wants to do. And a Monday night headline from the Daily Beast kind of paints the picture very clearly. The headline was Trump's big mouth propels Canadian liberals to victory. Yep. So what do y'all think about this? And then I'm going to give you Trump's response.
I appreciate that Trump disclaimer at the beginning, because I'm going to be a little hard on him for this one. He absolutely caused the liberals to win in Canada. I've been following Canadian political YouTube channels for a while, and the prediction was that the conservatives were going to come back and win and take over Canada again, because Trudeau has been running his country into the ground for years. And we could talk about the COVID policy. We could talk about freezing people's bank accounts for protesting and all, and just many, many other things. The economy has been horrible in Canada, much worse than here in the United States. And so they've been suffering from all these issues. They've had the same people in power for a long time. And there was definitely a very an outcry and definitely a sense of the polls moving and everything moving to where, okay, the conservatives have a really good chance, mainly just because the liberals have been running the country so poorly. All of that changed and switched directions as soon as Trump began talking about making Canada the 51st state.
I'm going to break in for a second and say, if you're enjoying this episode, stick around. And at the end, I'm going to show you how you can get access to exclusive content that's only found on locals.com.
And we could talk about the different reasons why Trump has put tariffs on Canada. Some reason I think are actually good, like he wants Canada to get their act together and stop allowing Chinese triad gangs to operate in their country and export fentanyl into the United States and all over the world. So I think there's been some needed pushback against Canada to say, hey, Canada, get your stuff together. Stop allowing these drugs to come across your border into the United States. And so all that's great. We could talk about that. But his language has been extreme enough that the liberals jumped all over it. And essentially, I saw online, it was entirely this idea of they were able to garner enough hatred for the United States that they hate the U.S. more than they love their own country. That's the idea, essentially, because the politicians have been running their country into the ground But because of the amount of hatred they were able to rile up against Trump and his language, essentially it was like, okay, it speaks for itself. The progressive candidate, he didn't run against the conservative candidate. He ran against Trump. And none of his advertisements is he talking about the conservative guy. He's talking about Trump. He ran against Trump, which is crazy because he's not in America, but he literally ran against Trump and won. And so, yeah, if Trump was not using that language, most likely I think the conservatives would have a way better chance of winning.
I think Trump did it on purpose.
Why? Why would he do that? Why did he want the liberals in charge?
Go ahead.
Yeah, I think that Trump had a twofold strategy going on here. Number one, Trump has always talked about the idea of all press is good press. So Trump's name is in the news again, always. Canada they've got Trump on their lips, which why would they even do that? That doesn't even make sense. But number two, I think Canada wasn't ready for a conservative leader. And I think that they actually needed to experience a little bit worse before they were willing to come to the conservative table and be like, okay, I guess actually now, yeah, we do need to pivot here. And I think that Trump knew that, and he was just pushing them to that brink, and he intentionally caused them to want a liberal leader who is going to be worse than the previous one, and who's going to do worse to their country than the previous one did. And I think it's exactly what he did with Joe Biden. And something's going to come back around after this cycle, and Canada's going to be more ready and willing to do something on the conservative side of things once they have experienced the full weight of their decision.
I might fall somewhere in the middle where I think that I haven't studied Canadian politics here for this recent election, but I would think that it's kind of this principle of, if you provoke something, people can get overconfident and they can overplay their hand. And so they get out over their skis, and then it can expose more of what they're doing, and it can actually make them more vulnerable. And so I think that, whether he intentionally got this liberal elected or not, either way, what it did was it allowed them to speak up more harshly and more clearly about their true intentions and what they're doing. And I think it can expose things and maybe even accelerate some of what you're talking about, Doug. And so, like I said, I'm not sure he's got this master plan of trying to get that guy elected and he understands all that, but I do think there is a plan of he's going to punch, and we'll see what comes out of it, because he's going to provoke something, and then they're going to overplay their hand and expose themselves in one way or another. And so I think that could be a part of this as well. And I think that I don't think he just is way off on his instincts. Like, I think his instincts as a businessman, he knows negotiation, he knows where it's at, and he knows where it needs to go, and he knows how to do something today that's going to benefit in a year from now and put us in a position. And so for me, that's more of where my head goes. It's just kind of like a negotiation, and he knows how to use the public facing aspect of that. And so he probably has something else in mind behind that as well.
Well, I'm sure that
go for it, Troy.
He probably had a response for either scenario. Like, okay, here's what I'll do if the conservative wins. Here's what I'll do if the liberal wins. And I've got both are good options,
I'm confident that with Trump at the helm, the U.S. is going to end up in a good state overall and be able to have good negotiations with China, especially pressure them on the drug stuff and whatever. I am just empathetic towards the suffering of the middle Canada and the conservatives in Canada, who themselves are we need serious change here in our country. And instead of getting serious change, they got a lot of the same. And unfortunately, whether you think that was intentional or not, a lot of that really is to blame, because they were able to garner up that level of support literally just based off of anti-Trump,
and that's
rhetoric.
Agreed.
Anybody that's conservative in Canada, if it gets too bad, you can always move down to here to the United States. Trump keeps talking about making them the 51st state. I don't want Canada to be the 51st state. You know why? Canada's full of progressives. That would be awful for our elections or our voting. Instead, all the conservatives in Canada should either move to the United States or move to one province, and we should annex that one province. And then make that the 51st state. Leave the rest of the progressives
no representation
into the ground if they want to. But I don't want them coming into our politics.
So I think we need to kind of understand a little bit about elected politics. So when I ran for office in 2020, they said, don't bother campaigning to people under 35. They're not going to go vote, and they're not going to and I'm just that doesn't make any sense. My wife and I are that's crazy. And they're yeah, but they don't vote, and traditionally, And so I mean, I didn't follow that advice, but now we saw the huge voting blocks, the young voting blocks came out, and I was kind of a little bit involved with the Iowa caucus for the Trump election, and you saw a huge push for a very boots on the ground, very different approach, very detailed approach. And that is what got people out to vote. And so that is on the parties, that is on the candidates, that is on the campaigns, that is on the people in politics. And so you can overcome the media stuff by going and knocking on someone's door and actually getting them to commit to come and vote. And so I'm still going to place this at the feet of the conservatives who didn't do their job in Canada. That's more around where I would say, and I may be putting that a little harshly, but you can't sit back in your armchair and hope people are going to come out and vote if your party's not out knocking on doors and actually making contacts and actually doing the work that's needed. And we saw a huge game. Like, I was involved in the Trump campaign in 2016 and in 2020, and I saw a radical shift in both the campaign and the Republican Party. There was big changes on how they handled things, how they had precinct captains, how they had very boots on the ground approach. And so I would push back and say, you know what, Canada conservatives, you got to get your act together and you got to get your boots on the ground and do more of what's going to actually move the needle to get people out to vote.
Maybe, but if we have a progressive president elected,
and that's what I think about that.
Then Canada's just going to say the same thing to us. They're going to be ripping you, Ryan, and be like,
it's true.
How come you weren't?
And they would be right
enough?
And they would be correct. And they would be correct.
Yeah, I think obviously Mark Carney ran on the right platform, being anti-Trump to be able to win, essentially, is what I mean. You don't have to have everybody agree, all the voters agree with you on all the issues anymore. You just have to get them all to agree with you on the issue that's out front and that's in the news more often than anything. And who's in the news more often than Trump? So it's like that idea of everybody agreeing on one single issue, and feeling very strongly about it. But I think with what you were saying, Doug, I agree to an extent. I think Trump knew what he was doing, but I think I take a little bit more of a perspective of a cynic. I don't think he, quote unquote, did it on purpose, with, some sort of long-term goal in mind. I think the result could be the same either way. I think what you said as a result, next time around, Canada might be fed up and they might say, hey, okay, enough's enough. We need a conservative leader. And that's what I'm praying for, personally for Canada. But at the same time, based on Trump's response, I think I would more likely put my money on the idea of maybe Trump just has a hard time with self-control and controlling his tongue. It's a biblical concept. James chapter 3 says, the tongue no man can tame. It's an unruly evil. It's this small little rudder that controls the entire ship, essentially. And I think once you turn in a certain direction, it's especially being a public figure, it's hard to recant from that. Anyways, here's Trump's response. That's my opinion. I could be wrong, could be completely wrong about this, but that's where I'm at right now. But this was his response. And again, I'm going to reiterate, I am very supportive of a lot of the things Trump is doing, very supportive of a lot of the policies that he's enacting, a lot of the things he's doing in the United States, a lot of the conservative values he stood up for, and a lot of the things he ran on. So even with that, I think it's okay to criticize leaders that we support when we disagree in small ways and in any way. So Trump's response, he said, to quote, after he found out that Mark Carney won, he said, until I came along, remember that the conservative was leading by 25 points. And then he said, then I was disliked by enough of the Canadians that I've thrown the election into a close call, right? Very weird, but it almost sounds to me like he's bragging, like, look, it was my, popularity. Look how much I've affected. It's like, well, but Trump, come on, man. We wanted a conservative to win, we didn't want, it's like, it almost sounds like he's more interested in being the thing that swung the vote than actually swinging the vote in the right direction. So that's where I'm getting that idea from. It could also be a personal vendetta as well. Another reply he had to another news source was, he said about the conservative candidate whose name I can't pronounce. He said this candidate is not a MAGA guy. And then he criticized the way that conservative Canadian leader was criticizing him.
Yeah.
Well, I got to say this.
I think there's a personal issue that's happening here as well, potentially.
I have when I ran for office when I started getting involved in politics, I had a pastor friend of mine that was really involved in politics. And he said, it doesn't really do any good to have a Republican in office if they vote like a Democrat. And so he actually,
I agree.
He actually said, not that we should be voting for Democrats, but he's saying it's very hard to primary a sitting Republican and win. It's happened, especially if the deep state and the establishment is against that candidate. But it's very hard to do that. It's easier to have someone else elected and then unseat them in the following election. And so that could be that would support both of the points that you made and that Doug made, is that, hey, it's not the right guy. Now, whether that's a personal thing or whether it's just it's not going to do any good to have him in anyway, so who cares? Let it go to the left and let them do more havoc and let it expose more of what they're doing, and then we'll turn around in the next election. So I would lean toward that take.
Well, and I'd have to disagree with your point a little bit, like kind of only partially on the tongue. So obviously the idea.
Disagree away, Doug.
the concept behind that is totally accurate, but I just don't think that's what Trump is doing. Like, I think that it's very intentional. For two examples, one, if you watch how Trump actually publishes his opinions, it's very strategic. This is not just throwing stuff out there to see what happens. He's got an entire team of people who surround him all the time, who are on all the different devices with all the different publishing tools, Truth or X or whatever it is they're on. And he says things and they record it, and then they strategize what the goal is to then put out the information that Trump has said. And that's why he's so on the front line with immediately responding to things, because he actually has a team of people who are doing this for him. It's a very, very detailed strategy. It's not just random. And then here's a good little homework assignment if you guys want. I don't mean to be throwing out homework, but go watch what Bill Maher just put out with his visit with Trump, and you'll see it's a very fascinating story that he tells. He literally went and visited Trump, and if you take the concept of the story behind Bill Maher's experience and pair it with the strategy, you'll see that there's two different Trumps that we're working with here. There's the strategic Trump, who is saying these things on purpose because he is manipulating the outcomes of events, and then there is the actual Trump, who he is as a person, who isn't really doing that. And it's very, very political, but it's a big rabbit hole to go down if you want to go down that way. But it's very interesting to watch him do all this. And I agree with you, Ryan, and also your point, Troy, of bringing up the follow-up on the conservative party leader wasn't really MAGA. What he means by that is he wasn't conservative enough. We need to either go all the way one way or all the way the other. And if we can't do that, if we can just kind of stick in this middle ground, nothing's ever going to happen. So I think perhaps what he did was he pushed it one way on purpose because it's going to bounce back on the other side.
We might have some more clear conclusions after the next election occurs.
Yeah, we're not going to know for a while. That's the problem. This is all speculation.
Yeah, and we've talked about the conservative backlash around the world on other episodes, and so I think this it'd be interesting for our viewers, audience, to go watch one of those and put this in this conversation in the context of that as well, and and see what conclusions you come up with there.
I'm curious to see what the Canadian conservative right is going to do after this, because like you said, if this is going to, in the end, help to make even a greater push so that the next elections cycle around are able to actually have a majority and seats and move in the conservative direction to save their country. Because I do mean save their country. I mean, I don't have time to get all into it, but Canada is experiencing some major, major problems. And so it's sad to see them continue to go further down the same route, but hopefully maybe they can turn it around the next election.
Time to get on the phone and start knocking on doors. Yeah. Get rid of that robo dialer and actually dial the number and go to people's houses.
Well, I'm hoping and praying that the silver lining here is that there's going to be a conservative win next time and that people go full force into it. I watched just part of a video that Charlie Kirk released this week titled "The Silver Lining to Canada's Disappointing Election Outcome." And I only watched the first 10 minutes, so he might have made a stronger point than this, but it seems like the silver lining he was talking about was, hey, at least we're not in Canada.
I was going to say, part of my with you guys talking about Trump, I don't disagree that Trump has like a strategy, and he has like especially strategic people helping him with, that all that kind of stuff. I just don't think, this is my personal take, I just don't think he cares about Canada. I don't think he cares enough about Canada to make a big deal about Canada. So I don't think he cares where their elections go, whether they go one way or the other way. I'm feeling for the Canadian people because I've seen a lot of conservative Canada YouTube, and I know kind of the things that they're up against. And so I just don't think that Trump was a friend to them this time around. I personally, again, I like a lot of things that Trump has been doing, but I have a hard time buying into the idea that he's like, oh no, I'm really going to help Canada. Like, I just don't think he cares enough about Canada, the fact that the things that he said caused their election to go a certain way.
That's fair.
Yeah.
I'm laughing, Troy, because what you said about Charlie Kirk, it's like, well, at least it didn't happen to us. It reminds me.
Yeah, that's
of
the
this.
silver lining.
I heard this. This guy was saying, I don't know if somebody spilled something, or they had to deal with this big difficult thing, and this guy comes over, puts his hand on his shoulder, and says, "Look, this could have gone worse. It could have been me that had to deal with this instead of you." So,
yeah, I think either way, Reese, I definitely agree with you. I definitely am feeling for the Canadians right now, especially the conservative Canadians, because they have it. They've already had it very hard, and in my mind, I'm like, man, I don't want to watch them go through another 4 years or longer with another liberal leader, after Trudeau and everything that's gone down there. And it's just, it's been insane. So
yeah,
praying for better times for Canadians.
Absolutely.
We also saw Trump put a 90-day pause on a lot of these tariffs. So technically, we're not even seeing the money roll in from a lot of the things that he's affected.
I don't think the tariffs are a cure-all. Like, let's just slap tariffs on everything and get them so high that way we have to manufacture everything. That is a little bit of an extreme approach.
China, it's very important about status. The President Xi comes out and says he's going to stand up to the U.S. If he doesn't, or if he does anything that even looks like he's not, then he's done.